Good morning. This is Pastor Jeff. This is Sunday, June 11th, 2023, Year A, second Sunday after Pentecost. I'm here before our church worship service at 9:15 preaching this message and want to remind you that we do have coffee and fellowship before church if that interests you. Our gospel reading today, Gospel of Matthew chapter 9, verses 9 through 13, and then 18 through 26. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax collection station, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. As he sat at the dinner in the house, many tax collectors and sinners came and were sitting with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does this teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when we heard this, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners." While he was saying these things to them, suddenly a leader came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." And Jesus got up and followed him with the disciples. Then, suddenly, a woman who had been suffering from a flood of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak. For she was saying to herself, "If I only touch the cloak, I will be made well." Jesus turned and seeing her, he said, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well." And the woman was made well from that moment. When Jesus came to the leader's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making commotion, he said, "Go away, for this girl is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by hand, and the girl got up. And the report of this spread throughout all of the district. The word of the Lord. This morning's lectionary intrigues me. When I first sat down and read it, I was fascinated by it on multiple levels. Then, on Friday night, I was at Stone Harbor, and one of my colleagues said that with how the lectionary falls, we will not see this passage for another 18 years. I did some quick math, and I might be retired by then, so this might be my one and only shot at this text. What am I to do? So let me begin by sharing with you the aspects that intrigue me, and then I will zero in on what I believe we need to hear this morning. The first aspect that jumped out to me was that we have a split text. We skipped 4 verses. Why? Also, if you notice in verse 18, when we jumped into, we read, "While he was saying these things." So I think it might be very helpful to hear what we skipped over. So let's hear that middle section. A little later, John's followers approached him asking, "Why is it that we and the Pharisees rigorously discipline body and spirit by fasting, but your followers don't?" Jesus told them, "When you're celebrating a wedding, you don't skip on the cake and wine. You feast. Later, you may need to exercise moderation, but not now. No one throws cold water on a friendly bonfire. This is kingdom come." He went on, "No one cuts up a silk scarf to patch old work clothes. You want fabrics that match, and you don't put your wine in cracked bottles." Then I was truly fascinated that this relatively short passage contains 3 stories: the calling of Matthew, a girl restored to life, and a woman is healed. This morning, I want to begin where our story begins. Jesus is walking the town after healing a man, and the crowd is in awe. As he is walking, he sees Matthew. Matthew is at work. He is sitting at his tax booth. He is either collecting the taxes from the fishermen or the tradesmen who are heading out of Jerusalem. When Jesus sees him, he calls out, "Matthew, come, follow me." This call is a controversial call. Individuals around Jesus had to be thinking, "You are calling him?" Jesus extends the call to Matthew, not because he saw Matthew being worthy of the call. Jesus extends the call knowing what he will put into him if he says yes. Jesus' command is fairly simple and straightforward, right? Matthew can respond with, "Yes, I will," or "No, I won't." The call that Jesus extends is an action-oriented response. For when Matthew and us answer with a yes, we are in a live now life. This life is one where we believe that the reign of God has come to us in the fullness. Without a question or a second thought, Matthew gets up from his booth, leaves his work behind, and follows Jesus. It is a simple act of obedience for him. Jesus calls. Matthew obeys. Jesus calls out to us to do the same. What will you do? There are benefits and burdens to obedience. Each one of us has to examine the costs and decide if we are going to be obedient. There will be many who hear the call of God, but they will say no. The cost of the call is way too high. When taking a deeper look at the cost of obedience this week, these two sentences really stood out to me. 1, God never calls us to something without first calling us away from something. And 2, you can never get to the next thing that God has for you until an act of simple obedience. You let go of where you are and follow him. Now, from the text, it seems that Jesus really follows Matthew to Matthew's house. He accepts hospitality in Matthew's house. Jesus accepting the invitation did not sit well, especially with John's disciples. Many of Jesus' opponents scorned the company that Jesus kept. In the house, there was a big meal. Jesus and the disciples are around a table with Matthew and Matthew's colleagues, fellow tax collectors who were labeled sinners. And there were other sinners at the table. These others at the table were Matthew's friends. Thus, when Matthew heeded the call, he did not leave his friends behind and simply focus on a holier set. The crowd of tax collectors and sinners that were gathered were probably fascinated that a rabbi would be interested in sharing a meal with them. When Jesus sits down with them, he is having a moment of intimacy and fellowship. The individuals around the table are drawn to Jesus. And this story shows us that Jesus calls each of us in a different way. It could be said that Jesus calls us in the manner that meets our need. In our Bible study on Tuesday, we heard a story of a pastor who was seen walking into a bar at noon. There were some church members who saw this, and they were offended that their pastor would do this, so they called the church council to complain. Later in the story, it was revealed that the pastor was meeting with a woman who was deeply troubled and contemplating suicide. She agreed to meet the pastor in that particular bar at noon. Her whole story was complicated, but the woman ended up getting some extensive counseling as she found her way to help. The story and the Bible study and the story of Jesus can challenge us to think about what it means to love and accept those who are actually offensive to us. Jesus seems to give us the key on how to do this through the gospel. And in this text, break bread with them. This is why I try to encourage us to be together in food and fellowship with one another. In the end, I love that Jesus goes where Matthew goes and participates in life where they are residing. I think we as a church can learn a lot about church life if we would follow this example. I get it. I know that many would love to see every pew filled in this holy space. But I think that our intentions might be a little misguided. Too often, we sit around pondering, what should we be doing to draw people into this building and sit in these pews? What if we flipped our thought process? What would happen if we tried to think about ways that we can engage human beings where they live? Thus, instead of standing out in the gathering space and waiting for individuals to walk into our doors, we could find ways to follow our neighbors out into the world, watching and responding to their needs as they emerge. I have spent most of my sermon time talking and taking a look at the first story and not the story that was skipped or the two healing stories. The reason is simple. I think that we need to realize that one, God can and will call anyone. And two, we need to realize that we need to go to them and not wait for them to come to us. Let me spend the last minute or two in the healing stories. While Jesus was having the dinner, it was interrupted. The interruption came from a leader in the synagogue. He needs a miracle. His daughter has just died, and he believes that Jesus can bring her back to life and will do it. Jesus gets up from the table and follows the man. On the way to the house, a woman has faith that if she just simply touches his tassels, that she will be healed. She does indeed touch him and is healed. Jesus, feeling the power leaving him, turns around to her, calls her daughter, and proclaims her well. He continues to the house. And when he reaches the house, he notices the flute players in the crowd making a commotion. He kicks them out. In 2 weeks, we'll be having special music with flute players. I promise not to kick them out. As he kicks them out, he tells them that she is not dead. She's just asleep. They laugh at Jesus, and then they kick it up a notch and they mock him. They do indeed leave. Jesus goes inside, grabs her hand, and she is raised from the dead. Everyone is shocked, and the news of the raising spreads through the community. So here's what I want to hear from the healing story. The piece of news that I am sharing with you that connects back to the call story of Matthew. It is with almost certainty that the synagogue leader would have been seen as an enemy. The community has been rejected from the synagogue. Thus, once again, Jesus is breaking through every category there is, whether it be relational or social. Once again, Jesus is challenging us to change. We cannot stigmatize people or place limits on them. With God, there are no limits. We have 3 individuals in our story today: Matthew, the woman, and the girl. Each one of them are at a different place in their social and religion realms. Jesus reaches out to them and provides healing for each one of them in the specific areas that they need healing. And all of this comes through the channel of faith. This faith, just like last week, is about a faith in Jesus. It is not a faith about a specific doctrine. So it is about being faithful to get up and follow when you are called. When the Matthew community hears these stories, I think they would have been reminded of Hosea's words. I'm after love that lasts, not more religion. Amen.